Hey guys, before we get to the video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the sponsor of this video today, and that's Core Essentials. For about 9 years, I've been using nothing but their belts, and I have to tell you, I've never been disappointed. I use them every single day. I have their leather belts, I have their tactical belts, I have their battle belt, and now they've sent me a couple of new belts, including their new buffalo hide belts. These are all 100% full grain leather, excellent choices, and they actually look awesome. I will tell you that I have no problem absolutely propping them up in this channel because they've always done a good job with their belts, and I know a lot of people have them and they say the same things. So check them out if you get an opportunity. So here we go to the video. All right, so obviously back in 2019, Glock released what was apparently kind of a direct shot towards the Smith & Wesson and the M&P Shield. They came out with the Glock 43X and 48 in 2019. Now, to some people were like, well, what would be the point of those guns? To others, everybody thought it was awesome because it was a slim form of what I would say is a Glock 19. And so there was kind of this mixed bag. Now, initially, when I had reviewed them, even I had kind of this idea, well, is it really useful? Is it not useful? I have to say I really like the 43X because it did feel very, very balanced when you would hold it and shoot it. The 48, on the other hand, was something that really reminded me of kind of like a Glock version of almost like a 1911, even though it had 10 rounds of 9mm. It was very skinny. It was basically a clone of the Glock 19 in the size. The only difference is that you're looking at like 1.1 inches of actual thickness on the Glock 48 versus a little bit thicker. I think it's like 1.6 inches on the Glock 19. So from that regard, it was a little bit more of a carryable firearm for a lot of people, especially for somebody who wanted something a little bit lighter and a little bit more comfortable. Now, of course, the big caveat to that was that it only came with 10 rounds instead of the standard 15 from a Glock 19, which would later be fixed with some magazines that came out that now have 15 rounds. So, of course, there is some fanfare still, obviously, because it is a Glock. Now, the question is going to be, has the Glock 48, and in this case, it's actually this one right here, which is the MOS, has the Glock 48 MOS aged well enough to be really a competitor still for a lot of the slimline guns that are available now? Now, obviously, back in the day, approximately like 5-6 years ago, I did a review, a comparison between the Smith & Wesson Shield, the 4-inch slide, versus the 48, and I actually picked the Smith because I liked just the overall feel of the Smith a little bit better. Fast forward a couple of years, I do have the Comp Carry here, which is a great gun, and I've got to say I've been extremely pleased with this gun. I have no complaints. I think it is a very formidable gun to carry, and also just to have the opportunity to have different magazine sizes so that you can carry, whether you want to carry lower rounds or higher rounds. So, I mean, to me, it really is the end-all be-all for a Smith & Wesson Shield. I just think it's a fantastic option. Now, of course, when you talk about the 48 MOS, I mean, you're looking at a different package than the original 48, which came out in 2019. About a year later in 2020, they released the MOS, and the MOS obviously has the pick rail on the bottom, which is just one little slot there. It also comes with the optic capability, and I think that was a big deal for a lot of people. Now, if you do hear some squeaking in the background, it is actually my dog's birthday today, and she is actually, according to dog years, she's 91 years old, so she's squeezing a new toy that we just got her, so pardon me for that, but I don't really care. She deserves it. Now, of course, moving forward with the Glock 48, there's a lot of features on this gun that are kind of still, in my opinion, very usable and very doable. First off, you have a very streamlined firearm where you're talking about 1.1 inches. You're talking about something that's about 18 ounces of carry weight. And yes, while it only carries 10 rounds, I believe it's Shield Arms that makes the magazines. You guys can correct me in the comments below. That go to 15 rounds. Now, for me, it's a no-brainer because living in New York State, we are relegated to, unfortunately, 10 rounds and only 10 rounds. So it actually works out well for me. I mean, if I was going to say to you, what are some of the downsides of this gun? It's pretty hard to figure out when you're looking at what it offers versus what it doesn't. First off, out of the box, the texturing is a little bit light. It is definitely not something that I would compare to, let's say, a Shield, or even for that matter, a Hellcat, or even for that matter, the Canic, which is the MC9 LS, which, by the way, I'll be doing a review on that soon enough. I would say that it is light stippling or light texturing on the grip, so it's not too abrasive to the skin, but at the same time, maybe a little bit more just to be able to have a good grip on the gun would be a little bit better. Again, you could always add like Talon grips or something like that to it if you choose to. The slide itself is actually a very nice slide. When you look at it, it is very rounded. Everything is beveled on the edge, which is very typical to a Gen 5 type of Glock. And obviously, you do get the rear and the front serrations. Now, overall, I'm going to tell you, the front serrations, well, I mean, they're kind of shitty, to be honest with you, because they don't really have a lot of depth to them, and they're not extremely sharp, and you don't get really a good bite on them. Now, is it impossible to rack the slide? It is not. However, I will say that the finish on this slide in particular is extremely slippery, very slick. And what I would say to you is that if you have an optic on here, you might have to rack the slide with the optic versus using any of the serrations, because I don't really think the front or the rear serrations are all that great. The trigger is a very typical Glock trigger. It is a very, it's a usable trigger, and kind of just show it to you here on camera, but it's a pretty short take up. There's a little bit of play, but not much, and a really nice solid break. The reset is a very positive break. So it isn't horrible. The weight is probably around six pounds right now out of the box. And I don't really plan on changing that. I mean, I'm going to keep it standard. However, I will tell you there's going to be some Tyrant CNC parts coming in here. And one of the things I will tell you is it's going to change the dynamics of the gun greatly, because I love their products. I also think the fact that this is an MOS slide also adds to the usability of this, especially now in the modern world versus 6 years ago. The fact is that you can attach, a 507K, 407K, anything with those types of footprints directly to the slide here, which I think is very beneficial. I'm not a big fan of using plates on any of these optic cuts, but I like the fact where I can just directly mount it to the slide, and I think that's a very good feature. Now, obviously, we can talk about the pick rail. The pick rail is really tiny. You have one little nub at the bottom there, so you only have one slot. You could probably put a light there, something like that, if you choose to do that. I don't really do that, so for me, it doesn't matter. Again, the trigger guard is a typical squared off trigger guard like a Glock. There is a slight undercut in the trigger guard, but nothing to write home about. The mag release is a standard mag release. It works. It does exactly what it's supposed to and drops the magazines with no issues. Now let's talk a little bit about the magazine. Again, very typical Glock. You're looking at basically a polymer magazine that encases some steel in here. I don't necessarily think the magazine is it's a typical Glock magazine, just a lot skinnier. You can see it carries only 10 rounds. I don't know if you can see that, but there's only 10 rounds in this magazine. Some people will complain that's not enough. In my opinion, that's plenty. But again, to each their own. I think overall, when you look at a Glock 48 and you're looking at the 48 MOS, I would definitely not bother getting a 48 at this point. Obviously, the optics are the big to-do right now. So I think with the 48 MOS, it is still a very viable system. You're going to get Glock reliability on these guns, and for me, that's a big plus. These are one of the very few guns that I would not mind carrying without having to test fire it or anything of that sort. The other thing I noticed with this gun versus the old one that I used to have is that this guide rod actually stays in place. The initial gun that I had, I think about 6 years ago, what I noticed was that every time I actually took the slide off of the lower or the polymer of this guide rod would pop out every single time. Now it seems much more secure. Not sure if they've changed anything, but to me, that is something I've definitely noticed versus the old model that I had, which was actually not the MOS. I mean, everything is standard Glock. There is no difference between this and any other Glock that you've seen. It is by far just a basic Glock. I mean, that's all it is. I will say, because it's a little skinnier, it does feel a little better in the hand than, let's say, your typical 19 or something of that sort. And honestly, aside from just basic changes that I'm going to do on this gun, it's going to stay pretty much the same. And I have to say I'm pretty happy with it. Keep in mind, one of the things that I did notice is that if you look at this, the back of the gun here, you have this little beaver tail, which extends further out than, let's say, a Glock 19, which is, and to me, it's a huge bonus, especially if you're concerned about getting any kind of slide bite. The only thing I would say to you is if you do have some meaty hands, which I do, the chances are you can see, I don't know if you can see that, but my hand, and I'll put it in a little B-roll here, but my hand is definitely sticking up towards that slide, which is a little bit, interesting. Now, one of the things I will do is stick my thumb up a little bit more, and that kind of reduces that hand meat that's sitting there. So I have to say I feel very comfortable carrying this gun. I would feel very comfortable carrying this gun anywhere because it is super slim. Now, obviously, comparatively speaking, if I take it and put it up against the shield is kind of on its own in regards to thinness. It is not as thick as the Glock 48, but the Glock 48 is pretty skinny, and it is definitely skinnier than the SIG, definitely skinnier than the Canic, and not as skinny as the shield. So, I mean, there's give and takes in everything right here. overall, what do I think? Well, I think the 48 MOS is still a very viable system, like I've mentioned before. I think if you're really on the fence to decide what skinny gun you want to carry, there's just so many options right now. The other thing I would say is that, there are some things you're going to probably want to change. First off, you're going to want to change the sights on here. They're the typical Glock plastic sights. You might want to change the trigger shoe depending on how comfortable you feel it is. I don't particularly care for the trigger shoe on the Glock, and that is something I look forward to getting rid of and putting something new on. But overall, that's about it. Now, I will tell you, these you can find very, very much so in affordable prices. Apparently, it seems like YouTube is somehow, getting rid of content when they talk about prices. I will say it was 3.5, so you guys can figure out what that means, versus some of the other guns that are out there that honestly are running you probably, 4.5 to 6.5. And, to me, that makes it a better choice right now, especially if you're looking for a more affordable option, especially with extreme reliability. So what I want to know is, what are your thoughts on the 48? Is the 48 MOS still a viable option today in 2024 going into 2025? Me personally, I do think it is. So I'd like to see those comments down below. Hope you guys have a great day. Stay safe. And as always, everyone, freedom is never free.